Great to see you again, and good to see we both were invest. Nice.
Yeah. Yours is more exciting, but yes, for sure.
Uh, you've got to put on appearances. Absolutely. But no, it's great to have you on board. It's been about 4 months since we've been able to catch up again, and just so much has happened in the industry since then. What I'd really loved, no, actually, let's do a bit of an intro about you. So, Scott, tell us, give us a 2 minute rundown on who you are and what you do. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. So I am an investment banker with Sierra Pacific Partners. We're a boutique bank. We do M&A advisory and capital raising. For the most part, our bread and butter is sell side M&A. So that's most of what we do. Without using all the fancy language, we're sort of like a real estate agent, but instead of selling houses, we sell businesses. We also do some buy side work, and sometimes in connection with the buy side work and sell side work, we'll help put together financing packages to help the transaction go through. We're industry agnostic, so we pretty much work in any industry. That said, we have some particular areas of focus. I've been doing quite a bit in renewable energy. Historically, we've done quite a bit in healthcare. I am located in California, so we've done quite a bit in tech, and of course, all those fields they're all very, very wide, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, so I'm based in the United States, so my perspective will largely be US based, but to a great degree, most of that is you can extrapolate from our experience here in the US in the main to what's going on more globally.
Absolutely. The US certainly does have the leadership role from the M&A side of things. That's for sure, throughout the world. Though, obscurely, what I've found talking with people is it's surprising how much influence the Scandinavians have. It's for such a small region. They seem to have their little fingers into everything.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I've definitely talked to some lawyers that particularly specialize in cross-border deals, and it is funny in speaking with them just randomly, they will frequently mention some sort of Scandinavian transaction that they're working on, which I can't give you the population stats or GDP numbers or anything like that, but it is sort of funny when you just randomly talk to someone, oh, what are you working on right now? The usual suspects for a while have been Ireland, as far as just because it's advantageous economically.
Yeah,
Ireland, Israel for startups, things like that. But you do tend to hear Scandinavia more than you would think.
can't understand it. In actual fact, why that highlights something for me is my son's company, software company, has just been taken over by a Scandinavian
Oh,
VC
okay,
as
yeah,
well. So,
there
yeah,
you go.
just amazing. What I'd really like to have a chat to you about today is we often talk about failures and successes in M&A, but I'd like to get your take on where there's gaps in the industry. Because last time we spoke, you made one little comment right at the very end, and I just thought that just blew everything apart. They do not, where was it? Uh, yeah, they do not want to pay for it because they do not understand the value. And that just could have gone for another half hour just on that one line there. So where do you see the gaps in the market in the M&A space right now? As in the practices, the work practices. Uh, a couple of little notes that I've got down here are forensic due diligence and coaching as an example.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I was at a conference earlier this week, and I think we should set the stage with professionals. And in this space, I consider professionals largely to be the sponsors. And by sponsors, I mean the PE funds and independent sponsors. In other words, the folks that make deals for a living. And for sure, you can put in, corporate buyers that have in-house corporate development teams. But what I would like to do to set the baseline is, one guy was speaking about diligencing a $70 million acquisition, right? And he said they fully expected to pay $1 million in advisory fees on that, right? And so we're talking about somebody who's extremely sophisticated, who has done more transactions than probably most of us, that is still relying heavily on those advisors, both legal and financial due diligence, right? And so one of the things I hear a lot, particularly down market, on the buy side is, oh, I worked in private equity, I worked in investment banking. I pretty much know how this works, so I don't need help. And you sort of chuckle at that because you're like, well, yeah, I looked you up on LinkedIn. You worked there for 3 years. I mean, that's great, but you weren't partner level or anything like that. And nothing against that experience. But what I'm saying is if you've got guys that are at the partner level that have been doing it for 20 years and they do see the value of those advisors, and so I would encourage almost everyone to sort of, it's almost you don't know what you don't know. And the guys that do see that value do know what they don't know. And they also know what's not efficient for them to do themselves. And they see the value in that advice. And so, what I would say, how that translates down market, I'm for sure not telling sellers, not telling buyers, of a, 10, $15 million business that they should expect to spend, $1 million in advisory fees, particularly for diligence and for legal. But you don't necessarily want the cheapest options out there. And I think in working with sellers, the things that I sort of work on are getting we want clean financials, right? And basically we need to do whatever it takes to get those. If we need to bring in an accounting firm to clean up the financials, that's what we need to do. If we got a little bit more time and we need to bring in an interim CFO to help with diligence, that's what we need to do. If we need to bring in I think we always want good legal counsel, because one of the things is you want someone not only that knows what they're doing and can protect you, but also someone that's not asking for things that are frankly odd and sort of tangential to the main points because it's not an area they practice in. Now, sometimes the other side will be like, "That's great. This guy's asking for weirdo stuff that doesn't matter. We'll give on those points because frankly we don't care."
Yeah.
But sometimes that can really derail a deal when you've got someone on there that doesn't understand. So I think my main point, and I was probably talking, that quote probably was talking about getting a sell side quality of earnings. That's my guess. Um, but I think the more you can do as a seller to present that you are a organized professional organization with very good accounting and bookkeeping, the better your sell process is going to be. And so some of that, the more you can do that up front, the better.
Just astounding words there because I try and teach people that all the time. They just don't get it. They think that they can walk into a business, they can throw a few together, and then do a roll up of those businesses.
And yeah, and so one of the things you'll see any buyer look at, because that's the dream, right? Is you take the platform that's trading at 10x, I'm making this up, right? You buy
Yeah.
you buy a lot of little bolt-ons that are trading at 5x, you aggregate them with the 10x, and boom, you just doubled your money, right? That's the dream. But the truth is, first of all, that's harder work than it looks. And if you're new to the game, realize you may get stuck at phase one. So you have to be comfortable operating that platform, that first investment. But even beyond that, smart buyers are going to look at the level of integration. So in other words, they're going to see the acquisition history and they're going to see, okay, you're operating in, let's say you're in Phoenix, right? I'm using US examples. You're operating in Phoenix. You got five businesses there that are relatively aggregated, but you bought three companies up in Las Vegas in the last, let's call it 18 months, and they're not integrated. What the buyer's going to tell you is, hey, we'll give you 10x on what you've got going in Phoenix, but we're going to buy those assets up in Las Vegas at the same price you paid for them because they're not integrated into the business. So you definitely have to have everything working cohesively as a whole for you to really realize that multiple arbitrage.
I feel as though you've got a remote control session on my screen right now, Scott, because I'm looking at a diagram and you're just going through the stages bit by bit.
Well, and I'm not cheating because you're not showing it to me on a different monitor. So, but yeah, I mean, I heard that. I was listening to a podcast about that sort of earlier this week, and it has to be a single the to achieve that multiple that you want. It's got to be a single business. It can't
Yeah.
be a holding company of a portfolio of businesses, some of which are really unified and some aren't.
Hold on. And yeah, it's just what you're saying is exactly where I wanted to go with this today. Just show people that you can do this, but you've got to have all the processes, all the stages in place. You can't just throw this together and think that it's going to come off for you. In Australia,
No,
we are very much with the value of the dollar against the US dollar right now and the overall economic environment in Australia, we are very much open to M&As and roll-ups. We're getting a lot of international people coming or organizations coming into Australia to do this. But what we're also finding is we're getting a lot of, oh, I've done a 5 day course or I've done a 2 day course and I'm going to go and do this.
yeah, and for sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of buying and selling businesses is particularly at the low, at the individual level, is more popular and dare I say trendy than it's ever been. We've got lots of
Yeah,
folks
yeah.
pitching this, which is great for me. I'm cool now. Maybe my children, my daughter would disagree, but no, I mean I think it's great that there is more interest in this, and I think it is indeed a great way if you have the characteristics of an owner to make your way in the world versus working for somebody else. But it's not a get rich quick scheme. And a lot of these courses, and I think there's significant pushback on this online from influencers that a lot of these folks that teach the so-called no money down strategies and things like that, generally speaking, they're junk. No seller, unless you are a relative or their long-term employee or someone else with a special relationship, no seller is going to do 100% seller financing unless you are their only option. And you have to look at the business and say, what's the reason why I'm that only option? But even beyond that, like even this integration deal, like so many things to be considered. Like, if you got five businesses, have you reduced redundant headcount? Is there a national sales pipeline if you're able to sell nationally, or is everything housed on CRMs within the individual locations? How's HR? Where's the employee? I mean, those are all the things that a buyer is going to probe to see if you really have one business. And that's just showing this is just on the administrative side. We're not really talking about real work in growing the business, but they're going to probe all that.
It's that administrative side that's so key. Again, down in this picture that I'm looking at here, I've got accounting, HR, payroll, training, IT, legal, marketing, purchasing, operations, property, sales. You just mentioned that one. That's what you need. You need that back end sorted. And if you haven't
And
got that consistent, you don't have anything.
no, because you're not really realizing the synergies of the scope that you're trying to build. And I think, I mean, even one thing is branding, because generally speaking, I'm not a branding consultant, so don't rely on my
Yeah.
advice here. And those people do exist, but it's a very strategic question. If we make an acquisition, when, if, and how do we rebrand, right? So there's definitely something to be said for, well, we took over this business, they're highly successful. We don't want to change the name. But a buyer, if you're really operating, I don't know, 20 different locations all under different names, do you really have one business? So it's very strategic how you move that successful business from the original name to your name. And there may be intermediate steps. It may be XYZ, an ABC company. It may start as XYZ, then it may become XYZ, an ABC company before it just becomes ABC, right? So it's a process.
And not, I'm so glad you brought that up. And another way of doing that that I've seen as well is a XYZ holding an XYZ company. So you might have the
Yeah.
original name with an
Yeah.
XYZ company down the bottom left corner.
Yeah.
And then what you find is that eventually the founder of that business, who's still involved and still working at this stage, they'll come to you and say, hey, well, look, uh, this isn't really working anymore because I'm seeing so many of these and XYZ companies out there. We should probably just put them together as one because you can't tell anybody anything because they're not going to believe you. You've got to wait for them to tell you because they always believe what comes out of their mouth.
No, that's exactly right. And so the branding challenge though is just one example, right? And for sure, I'm not saying everything needs to be migrated over to the master brand. I mean, for sure, you can have regional brands, you can do, but I think that's something a buyer is going to look at. And one of the things they're also going to look at, as we talk about integration is, well, hey, if you've made all these acquisitions in the last 18 months, just by virtue of time, point blank, we don't think they're integrated. You can show us data, you can show us how you're making strides in that direction, but just based on the timetable, we don't think you're fully integrated.
Oh, great. So, what sort of time do you think is a reasonable time frame?
I
Looking at
mean,
the,
I'll
you can
say,
obviously see the diagram I've got below. So, looking at my diagram, what do you think?
yeah, yeah. And you'll forgive me, I should have said Z, not XYZ. Since
It's
I'm
okay.
giving my
We're
Americanism away.
multilingual.
I may not. So, um, no, there's no set time frame, right? But I'm just saying that's something that someone's going to look a scan set, and you see the bigger top quartile, some of the largest by AUM firms doing this, that they are actively until the day they IPO, until the day they sell to another PE firm. They're actively adding those add-ons, right? But the buyer does know that the company you bought yesterday before the closing of the big deal, they're not fully integrated, right? So it's a balance, but you cannot think that we go and buy five, whatever, five HVAC companies and in 1 year and then try to resell them as a unified company, 12 months later. That's just not going to happen. Well,
I
I'm not going
generally,
to say it's not going to happen. You're not going to extract the full value that
yeah,
the 2 day course was teaching you to hope for within that period. You may extract some for sure. There is value there, but it's just not going to be from 5x to 10x. It may be from 5 to 6.5 or whatever your numbers are.
yeah. I think 4 years is a reasonable figure.
Yeah.
That way,
Yeah.
because you're not going to accumulate all these companies on in the first month. Therefore, they're
No.
going to dribble in over the maybe three if you're lucky on the first year, then another five or six on the second year. So they're going to dribble in. But four, 4 to 5 years, I think, is a reasonable time frame there. But yes, what you learn on those 2 day courses is, yeah, we've got someone here I'm in Melbourne in Victoria in Australia. We've got someone here who does teach those 2 day courses, and right now they've got a group of people that are suing them for,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
yeah, it's just not reality. You've got to have your feet on the ground. You've got to actually be in there making a difference for years to come. And that's why this podcast is called M&A Profits, Lessons from the Trenches, because you have to have those lessons. Now,
And
something else, sorry,
well, I don't want to attack all the courses. I know John Stoddard's great in the United States. He teaches courses. There's folks that teach courses based in reality, and I think those are fine.
Adam
And there
Coffey.
needs, yeah, yeah, no, 100%. Adam's great. His new book's fantastic, by the way. I really like his new book,
So,
Empire Builders, I think.
oh, that's no, that's number four. Number five is coming out soon. I've been chatting with him about it.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's a great place to start, and I think I think all he and everyone else who gives good advice, it's based on building with the end in mind, which is key. But he doesn't skip steps and he doesn't say, we're going to start with this one acquisition. We're going to strategically pick an industry, but we're going to be just, but we're just going to be moving forward. super quick.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Interesting you say you've got to start the end in mind. Adam Coffey, as an example, is a pilot. So he uses the analogy of he starts with the destination and figures out what steps are going to get to there. So, yeah, interesting. Uh, okay, there was something else that you mentioned, and that was, and you're a qualified lawyer yourself, aren't you?
Yes.
Yes. So I went into an organization and the deal was signed already. They budgeted 300K for onerous contracts within the IT arena. And I went in and I had a look at their contracts there and what the seller, the seller had obviously planned this sale a couple of years in advance. So what they'd done was they had put their gone out to the vendors and they said, okay, we're going to set up a low cost in the first year, low cost in the second year, and a balloon payment in the third year for this application or these applications. And they'd gone to a number of their vendors to do that. So when did they sell their business? 2.5 years before that third year kicked in when the costs ballooned out. So you have to be on the lookout for those sorts of things as well. When you're doing your due diligence and you're going in deep, and you said you bring the lawyers on in that process, you've got to be on the lookout for how long have they been preparing for this and what nasty tricks have they hidden to get you.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'll say that on both sides we try to do is ferret out key points early at the letter of intent stage because on both sides you just don't want to waste time. I think
Mm.
if there are certain terms that the buyer needs and the seller's going to say out of hand, hey, I'm not doing that, it's better for everybody to figure that out pretty quickly. Same thing on the sell side. If the seller, has certain requirements and the buyer for whatever reason can't meet them, the earlier both sides figure that out, the better. Now, for sure, things you can't do everything at once up front, and some things do get kicked down the road. But we've seen multiple deals. I have other advisors have. I had a call about this earlier this week with someone else that like working capital is one of those items that for whatever reason, a lot of times, well, I know the reason. In the LOI, you'll just see a bald statement, with the normalized level of working capital, right? And so what ends up happening because you haven't done all your financial due diligence yet, and maybe the seller's not on GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, or some other form of standard accounting, so it's a little bit hard to tell what that level is. Well, what ends up happening in the process is based on diligence a lot of times the buyer will sort of beat the seller down, both on purchase price and on maybe the seller's post closing role in the business. Typically, if you're bought by a professional buyer, they're not going to let you work lifestyle hours after closing if you're going to remain, right? Well, so
Yep.
you beat them down, you make them work hard, and then you've also sort of fatigued them with all these diligence asks. And then right at the end, the last thing you say is, oh, by the way, we finally heard back from our FDD firm, and we're going to need 10% of the purchase price as working capital. And that'll be the last straw, right? And so it's a huge waste. If that happens, it's a huge waste of time for both sides. You've gone through tremendous expense on on the buy side in vetting the business. On the sell side, you've incurred, tremendous distraction from running your business by responding to diligence requests and things like that. So the more you can get out in front of things, the better. And I think that is the most important thing that we do as advisors, and I think that the parties can do, is really work to set expectations. And so flipping back to my example, like, yeah, maybe we don't have a working capital peg in that LOI, but maybe the LOI is preceded by a phone call where the buyer says, hey, like, we don't have the exact number yet, but just based on preliminary analysis, we're looking at a pretty large number for working capital. And I think having that discussion really sets the stage so it's not a surprise on the tail end. And like I said, if it blows up the deal on the front end, to a degree, That's good because we were never going to get to closing anyway, and we've saved everybody a lot of time. So that's just one example, but I think expectations are super important.
Absolutely. If you've got to go in with the right ethics and framework, otherwise you're going to get the signature on the line, and then there's going to be friction during the integration process. And that's when you're going to lose your synergy, lose your profits, and it's all over. So what was the point in the first place? Just be upfront.
And particularly if you need that seller post closing, as many acquisitions do, either as you've got that seller as your remaining CEO, you've got that seller
Mm.
as a key salesperson or consultant, even you've got that seller as an equity holder. That's not someone you want to have a bad relationship with. That's someone you want to be on very good terms with post closing.
No. And that person, or they probably haven't done this before either. So having the conversation with them, and what I often do is, oh, well, pretty much always, I have a conversation with someone and I say, okay, these are my four rules. First rule is tell me what you can do. Second rule is tell me what you can't do, and that's okay because there's always someone out there that can. Third rule, never lie to me or my customer. Fourth rule, never ignore me or my customer. So I go through those up front, and it does set the scene. It sets the framework for a good communications with people. And I find that's very effective.
And yeah, absolutely, it's sort of setting those ground rules and get essentially giving your counterparty permission to be just candid and open with you, I think is important. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is I love, I'm a professional emailer, I email a lot, but there's nothing replaces picking up the phone or getting on a Zoom. Say, almost any time you do anything, like talking about doing diligence, right? Sure, you send over your diligence list, and the lawyers have probably put a statement, hopefully somewhere on it, that basically says, hey, if anything on this list is unduly burdensome, let us know because it may turn out you just may not have a way to capture that data that doesn't cost you 100 man hours. And you may find out that your buyer really doesn't care about that piece, right? But that's
Mm.
buried in size 8 font and italic somewhere. Have that call before you send over the list, right? I think that's super important because you don't, I've oddly seen on smaller businesses, picking on diligence a little bit, I've
Yep.
seen sellers just overwhelmed by endless requests. We had a situation where we had someone basically with a fractional COO, and this person was a fractional COO for probably four companies, and she was getting probably 40, full-time work worth of diligence, right? And so that eventually was one of the things that I think just beat this company down and had them walk away from the sale. But on the other end, I've had very sophisticated buyers somewhat get upset um, with request lists that have nothing to do with their business. In other words, you don't have a software business and yet you serve up a diligence request list with 3 pages of software related requests that's then backed up by a purchase agreement with 10 pages of IP reps, like your software company. I mean, I've had people just basically get irate at that. So you need to target it to the business. And I think a lot of that is if you have the conversations and you invite people to be open. You say, hey, no, we're not a software business. And then the buyer says, okay, we got it. Cross off items 3 through 17. Or the buyer says, no, we think there's an angle there. And you decide what you want to do.
And you're right. I get that. They have their standard due diligence forms and they just send them out. Well, before you send them out, at least write the company name on it. At least write what you know in there first to say that, okay, I care about you filling this out. I've made an effort to help you. Here.
And we do that too. So we have like a standard diligence form that we
Yeah,
use
of course.
for certain transactions. And one of the first things we do is me and my staff, before we send it out, our own internal diligence for our sellers, we pre-fill it out. And we'll definitely say, hey, correct anything that's wrong, and I get it's a different situation when it's on your own side versus a counterparty that's a little bit different. But we'll say, hey, we've tried to ease the burden on you as much as possible. If we said anything wrong, feel free to correct it. And I think
Yeah.
doing stuff like that can really help expedite. And another thing I think is super important, and again, I was talking to somebody else about this week, is that again, the professional players will go out there and meet you in person. And I think you talk to any PE fund and they've got somebody that's good at that. It may not be their biggest financial wizard. It may be their biggest people person, which is probably the smart move. If you're by yourself, it's got to be you. You're sort of stuck. But I think
Yep.
that is something you can very much differentiate yourself. And I think folks will say, well, hey, Scott, I'm sending out 10 LOIs all over the country. I don't have the money to fly everywhere, money or the time to fly everywhere. And I think sellers can sense that. And you may get picked by the person that did fly out and meet because the seller's going to think, well, Sarah is really interested in my business. She actually flew here. She probably doesn't have 10 LOIs pending right now, right? I'm probably one
Right.
of one or one of three. And so,
Mm.
and it's also key when you do move forward, if you pass that threshold, to have that sort of in-person relationship again, because I think it does create some of the freedom to be honest, and just make sure that things are a good fit before you go too far down the road.
And when you go out like that, it's not in the office. It's at a restaurant, it's at a cafe, and you're not there pounding them with questions. You're there. Oh, how are the kids? What do you do?
That's an excellent point. And so a lot of times the true business level discussion, the real management meeting does occur at the office. And that's where you'll get all the financials, all the sort of the hard data, so to speak. But it's at that dinner afterwards where you find out if your seller really wants to sell, where you find out if your seller is really committed to working 3 years post closing, right? That's I think the key. You get a lot of soft information, which can be just as valuable in that informal setting, just more casual.
Most importantly, why they want to sell, and not the first answer they give you either. It's the second and the third answer that they give you, which is the real answer.
And and why they want to sell is super important. I mean, it gauges their seriousness in getting to closing, number one. I mean, I'll give a plug for people who what I do. Somebody that's paying someone like me is probably somewhat serious, or they wouldn't, they wouldn't be paying me. But beyond that, I mean, I think the way I like to conceptualize it is you want something that pushes people forward, pulls people forward versus just pushing them. And I think a push is more. My wife's making me retire, or my husband's making me retire. A push is a health concern or a divorce. A pull is, you gave me the pilot example. For whatever reason, I've had this dream of circumnavigating the globe via Cessna or hot air balloon. Okay, that's something that's really pulling them forward and motivating them. Because I heard some stat that like almost 75%. I don't vouch for the stat, but just the magnitude of it's what's important. Of business owners say that selling their business is one of the biggest regrets in their life, and that's not what you want. And that doesn't bode well for leaning on that seller either in an official or an informal capacity post closing. If you need help, you want to probe that and make sure that they really do have something on the other side that they're looking forward to.
Mm. Well, Scott, this has been terrific. I've really, I think everyone's got enormous value out of what you've had to say today and contributions. I came in here today because I wanted to fill some of these gaps, and I think we've filled the due diligence. We've spoken about the integration. We didn't actually get onto the coaching, but we also got onto the BDM and the sales side of things as well. And most of all, we got onto the back end business and consistency and preparedness. So I must send you this diagram after this session and just show you what we spoke about because I already have it
Yeah.
laid out and you've just been reading it off bit by bit.
Well, I'm excited to see how I did against the unknown metric. I'm excited, Greg. Send it over.
Just for you, Scott, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a rating out of 10 for each of the items, okay? And
Oh
we'll
man, I didn't know it
tally
was
it up.
being graded. All right, well, I'll look forward to that.
Uh, have you got any parting words for us? Apart from next time, tell me when I'm being tested.
No, no, no. Yeah, get and send me the test beforehand. No, I don't. And speaking of that, I think that is sort of the answer that we all have seen the various roadmaps to successful transactions. And it's a very process and checklist driven process that does involve an overlay of maybe 60%, psychology on top of that. But you really can't skip steps. And that's what I would tell everyone who wants to be in this, business as a principal rather than as an agent like me is that, it takes hard work. And you're not going to get there with none of your own money, none of your own effort, and have it happen super quickly. So you got to be committed. And we see it in the US, particularly in the Main Street space. You can for sure get stuck. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but you can have a dream of owning a roofing empire. You can buy one company, have some struggles there, and find yourself in that one roofing company for 10 years before you expand. So you need to be committed to that, which is different than PE. PE can cut bait on that one and they can move on to something else. But if you're undiversified and you got a personal guarantee and your home's on the line, you're gonna have to be willing to put in that work.
And with each of the businesses that you buy, they've got to be profitable. They've got to be making money before you can't go and buy the next one and think, oh, I'll get my profit back on that one. I've learned off this one. I'll get my profit back on that one. Get your systems, your processes right in that first one before you start scaling up. Otherwise, you're just going to lose more money on the next one as well. It's it's not a game of luck. It is a game of planning, persistence, and taking the time. And over all of that, people right the way through it.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Scott. I think we should call it there.